Alright guys, so today we're looking at your Chapter 9 review. This is also, we could call this the Unit 1.1. So that's because it's like a half a step between Unit 1 and 2. Anyway, so let's first start by going through this section here. We're looking at the matching section. Now, secondary sector. If you guys will remember, there are 4 sectors to the economy, actually. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary. Now, that said, secondary, if you guys remember from class, we said primary is like pulling things from the ground. That's raw materials. So that would be like farming, mining, and ranching. So A would be the number 5 would be A, the primary sector. Secondary sector would be that manufacturing level of the economy, which is B. Government jobs or services. How do we get, like, you get a car, you get a car, you get a car. How do people get their things? That'll be C. GDP per capita. This stands for gross domestic product, and in your notes you wrote down that per capita means per person. So the answer to this one here would be the value of total output of goods and services produced in a country divided by the population, which would mean divided by the number of people. So this right here would be F. Productivity. Guys, when you have a productive day, that means you're getting a lot out of your day. So when we see an increase in productivity, that means the value of the product compared to the amount of labor needed to make it is distancing. When it's cheaper to make a product and the amount of labor lessens, consider this with like the cotton gin. The cotton gin made having cotton a more productive thing, whereas before, in order to process cotton, it took way too much work and labor, and it almost wasn't worth it. Slavery was actually on its way out of the South, and then Eli Whitney invents the cotton gin, and that's where we saw the increase in slavery within the South. Because all of a sudden, the cotton gin could do the work of 5 slaves, and it made growing cotton all the more profitable. Next up, we look at value added. The answer to this one is D, the value of a product minus the cost of raw materials and energy. This would be kind of like your profit in a way. Literacy rate. Literacy means who can read. That would be I. Not to be confused with illiterate, which is cannot read. Next up, development. Now this is something I told you guys to write down at the very top of your notes. I said, write this down. It's important you know this. Or put a star next to it in your note. It's the improvement in the material conditions of a people. That is important that you know that. And then lastly, fair trade. Part of the fair trade model is paying workers adequate wages. Remember, adequate, we said, means what works for their economy, not necessarily the U.S. economy. But we're paying them a fair amount of money. We're not paying them, like, under the going rate for their country. Now, if a country has a GDP of less than $15,000, is it considered more or less developed? Now, this is something you could have used all of these right here. You could have used HDI, Material World, or your East Asia Development Center, Development Center activity. This is basically all from section 9.1. If a country is less than $15,000 per capita, it would be considered less developed. You know, in the world, MDCs are getting richer. Even if LDCs stay the same, because MDCs are becoming more developed, and the technology is increasing, even if LDCs stay the same, the distance between the two is widening. So it is widening. Now, why are workers in MDCs more productive than workers in LDCs? Now, you took these notes in 9.1, I believe. They're 9.1. Actually, no, these were in 9.4. You took these notes in 9.4. The reason they're more productive is because of technology. You wrote this down. This is something I told you to write down. I said you're going to have to know this. Now, in an MDC, if you looked at your 9.1 notes, the bottom right of your 9.1 notes, it tells you about what it would look like. And if we were to look at it, the pie graph based on different labor sectors, in an MDC, let's see, in an MDC, you're going to have less primary, slightly more secondary, but most of everything is going to be in the tertiary and quaternary departments. Now, in an LDC based on labor sectors, because we are less developed, we are going to see the QT area be smaller. Secondary still exists, but primary is going to be where most jobs are. And then, lastly, in a pie graph of jobs based on labor sectors, in a country that is in the midst of being newly industrialized, it's going to be a little bit more evenly split between primary, quaternary, tertiary, and secondary. And these are all in your notes, guys, from the East Asia activity. East Asia Development Centers, you guys made your own pie graphs, in fact. I just wrote East Asia to the side, so you can know where in your notes to find it. Everything's wrong. Okay, so what is the core and what is the periphery, and where do they appear on a map? Okay, so the core refers to, when we look at a map, it's from a North Pole projection. The North Pole projection, which means basically if you were looking down at a globe, if you were looking downward at a globe, what would you see? If you're looking downward at a globe, in the core, in the center, there would be kind of like a center and a periphery. And in the center is where most MDCs are. And in the periphery, on the outer area, is where LDCs are. This is kind of like a new it's kind of a new model to see. Like, it's just an interesting pattern that they notice that most MDCs are in that northern hemisphere. They're in the northern hemisphere in the core, and most LDCs happen to be on the outer side of that. Now, what is the self-sufficiency approach, and how did it work in India? Now, the self-sufficiency approach would be when we make the decision to I always use that term by accident. It's when we make the decision to limit imports and focus on all sectors of the economy. So we limit imports. I think I said exports. I meant imports. Limit imports. Focus on developing all sectors. Develop. Within this, because the government's kind of controlling how much we're importing and exporting, it's focusing on all sectors of development. One of the problems is, though, is that there's lots of bureaucracy, which means in order for anything to happen, there's a lot of like government hoops to jump through. I had it spelled right next to me, so I was trying to make sure I got it right. And corruption. The thing is that it didn't work very well in India. Yes, they got developed on all levels, but it didn't work too well. And so now, because of that, and this is the important part, because it didn't work well before, India is more focused on international trade model. Now, what are the problems with the self-sufficiency approach? I did just say these kind of in our last one. That would be the bureaucracy and corruption. Now, there are 5 the next thing it asks are, what are the 5 stages of Rosco's development model? What are the 5 stages of Rosco's development model? Now, if we're looking at Rosco's development model, and remember, guys, this model really focuses kind of on the European version of development. We're going to start with number 1. Number 1 would refer to a traditional society. Now, traditional society would mean primary sectors of the economy and focus on agriculture. Well, then, from the traditional society, you have to have, number 2, the preconditions for takeoff. And your preconditions for takeoff is that an elite group invests money. An elite group invests money when the unique assets of that area are identified. So an elite group is going to identify your unique assets, and they're going to put money in it. Once that is done, all of a sudden now you have room for development. So now we have the takeoff, which means you find success. That's plus signs and happiness. So you have the takeoff, and then you have the drive to maturity, which means in all of these different and everything that you're finding growth in, you have the takeoff, and this is working so well, so you find ways to make some of the model that's working here, you're finding ways to make it work in other industries as well. For instance, in Dubai, where they started with the traditional society with fishing, they had an elite group that identified their asset of tourism and invested in it. They had a lot of success with tourism, and that splintered off into the drive to maturity, which was kind of like that global economy, global businesses, bringing all of that in, all the construction they were doing, the building, it fed the economy and was able to let it grow. And then lastly, number 5 is the age of mass consumption, which is the global market, which means officially achieving globalization and having a global marketplace, which is something that in the drive to maturity, with all of the investment in tourism, Dubai was then able to go to their drive to maturity, which was they invested in construction, in businesses, and because of that, now they've achieved the level the global marketplace. Now, most people would say that development can't begin until an elite group invests an elite group invests in an asset. So that's all of that. Now our next page. Actually, I don't know if this is y'all's next page. You might still be on the front page. So if you're like, wait, the last question is not there, because I think the last question on y'all's page is actually, what are the problems with Rostow's international trade model? This isn't actually something we talked about in class, so if this is something you didn't know, please, like, don't fret, don't feel like you missed something. So the problems with Rostow's international trade model is that it, a resource of a country might not be valuable in the world market, for instance, copper. And it's also dangerous just to depend on one export. The resource could run out. It has to do with resources. It's dangerous to invest in only one. Alright, so circle the more developed regions. Guys, on your notes, actually, from, let's see, your HDI Material World paper, on the back of it, I told you to write this down. I said, what are the most developed regions in the world? And I told you you'd have to know it. Ayo. So, the most developed regions of the world. Japan should be 1. North America, Europe, and Oceania. Oceania is also Australia, otherwise known as the South Pacific. Things to know. Okay. So, why isn't crude death rate used to determine a country's level of development? We talked about this in all my classes. We said the reason is because death happens everywhere. Not just in less developed countries or more developed countries. Now, when we're trying to determine, because I did have a student say, well, aren't you technically more likely to die maybe if you're in, die at a young age if you're in a less developed country? Well, in that case, you would look at life expectancy. What are the 3 main energy resources that are important for development? The 3 main important ones are natural gas, coal, and petroleum. Now, speaking of petroleum, the U.S. is one of the largest producers of all 3 of these in the world. There are also, but we are also one of the primary consumers of all of those in the world. When we look at OPEC, OPEC is the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. Now, one of the funny things is that the U.S. doesn't really export a lot of petroleum. That's why we're not in this. It's made mainly of countries from the Middle East. I'm sorry this keeps blurring and unfocusing, y'all. I think I just keep sticking my hand is too far under it, and so it's causing problems. And basically, their primary goal is to control the price or supply of oil. Because what they found is that the countries who were supplying most of the world's oil weren't necessarily benefiting from it. And so something that the Middle East is actually using to become more developed is oil. Main cause of shrinking in the Ural Sea, it's one of the videos you guys watched in your cost of development activity. One of the main reasons we see the shrinking of the Ural Sea was the irrigation. They tried to irrigate rivers. Irrigate rivers to cotton fields. And guys, cotton uses a whole lot of water, and because of that, the Ural Sea dried up very, very quickly. They were able to build a dam to change it, but still, it was very alarming. It used to be like the 4th largest lake in the world. Now, how do less developed countries get money to develop? They borrow money or take out loans from MDCs or international banks. The problem is, a lot of times they can't pay it back and they have high interest rates. Because if you're a less developed country, you're a risk, and so they're going to want to be sure that you are returning on your investment, and they're going to get you at the high interest rates. Now, economically, MDCs and LDCs do have a connection. LDCs provide raw materials and labor for MDCs. Okay, economic spectrum. So I'm going to go through this one pretty quickly because I feel like this should be pretty basic. Okay, so on the far left we have communism, socialism, and free enterprise. Now, we have all three of these. Specifically, what we're going to notice in the latter of these, when we're separating these out, for communism, in communism we're going to have an economy that struggles to grow. And we're also going to have government control. Government controls, government provides jobs, housing, etc. In the socialist part of the spectrum, we're going to see that there's high taxes, We're also going to see that the government regulates some aspects of the economy. Alright, so high taxes. Government regulates some parts of the economy, like healthcare. And then lastly, in the free enterprise, without government control, citizens own business. And it's a supply and demand controlled economy. Now, the U.S. is going to fall somewhere on this spectrum, and if you were to place on the spectrum, you should know about where it would fall. We aren't all the way to free enterprise, like if this is where the spectrum falls. The U.S. would probably be somewhere between socialism and free enterprise, but closer to free enterprise. It's kind of on the free enterprise side of the spectrum, because there are some aspects of government control. I was trying to say, like, I don't even know what word I was trying to say. I think I was trying to say, like, aspects. There's some aspects of government control. I don't even know. Hashtag Columbus Day. So what has been the overall trend worldwide with girls going to school? How will a change in this trend affect countries economically, politically, and socially? Okay, so guys, I'm not going to write this out for you. I'm just going to talk about it. Basically, when you increase girls going to school, you're going to increase your literacy rate, and you're going to lower your population, because when girls get into high school, if they continue going to school and further their education, they're less likely to get married and have babies at a young age. Therefore, they're more likely to further their education with college. They're more likely to go into the workforce. And it affects you economically, because a better economy, when there's a better economy because both genders are working and not just males, There's also more rights and political opportunities for women when this happens. And then socially and culturally, for girls, there's more equality, there's higher literacy rate, lower population, and there's a delay of marriage. You don't have girls getting married at 15. Number 32, what is outsourcing and how does it affect developed countries such as the United States, and how does it affect less developed countries such as India, China, or Mexico? So basically, sending jobs such as manufacturing from MDCs to LDCs due to cheaper wages. I'm just going to show you guys this is what I'm reading. And no minimum wage laws in LDCs. Developed countries lose manufacturing jobs, but they benefit from cheaper products. Developed countries, so they lose manufacturing jobs, just like we don't manufacture a whole lot in the United States anymore, but we benefit from the cheaper products. LDCs are going to gain factory jobs, but still are going to have low wages, long hours, and more pollution because their country hasn't put restrictions on that yet. Then how has Dubai, the United Arab Emirates, used Rosco's international trade model? Basically, they started as a traditional society of pearl divers and fishermen. They identified tourism as their unique asset, and this is where, again, you have the drive to maturity. They're going to build the tallest buildings, the fanciest hotels, shopping, indoor ski slopes, etc. Construction and tourism expand to other sectors of the economy. Now they're in the age of mass consumption and globalization. Alright, folks, I hope that was helpful for you. Posting this to my YouTube channel.